Good morning, everyone. I'm so pleased to be here this morning on behalf of Con Edison. We are incredibly proud to support this important convening and have since the first MAS Summit in New York City 4 years ago. New York City has its share of large institutions, eds, meds, cultures, campuses, connected buildings, and standalones. Each one is different, and each local neighborhood that plays host to one brings their own unique conditions and challenges. Large institutions have the potential not only to contribute to broader civic life, but also to contribute to their surrounding neighborhoods. But sometimes communities feel that these institutions are either disconnected or too remote from their neighbors, or overpowering in their dominance. Some successful institutions, like those on today's panel, have developed an intricate balance, becoming invaluable anchors and providing a stabilizing force in their neighborhoods, offering employment opportunity and acting as community hubs of culture, education, and incubation. How do we encourage these mutually beneficial relationships between institutions and their host communities? What are the engagement strategies that help institutions become agents of positive change in their neighborhoods? Here with us to moderate today's panel on this topic is Ted Howard, co-founder and executive director of the Democracy Collaborative, whose work in cities around the country is showing us the potential that institutions have to catalyze remarkable community revitalization. I'll now hand it over to Ted and his panelists, Donald Hyslop, Tony Marx, Richard Olcott, and Jennifer Raab.
Thank you very much. Welcome, everyone. I wanted to begin by very briefly setting the stage by what do we mean by large institutions and what kind of institutions are represented here. Another way to talk about them is anchor institutions. And why do we call them anchors? Because they're really rooted and stuck in place. Most universities, large hospitals, cultural institutions, they've been there for decades, sometimes universities for hundreds of years, and they're likely to be in the same place. Typically, they're among the largest economic engines in their area. In New York City, 5 of the top 10 private sector employers are eds and meds, hospitals and universities, generally nonprofit. Because these institutions don't get up and leave, they really have a vested interest in ensuring that the neighborhoods where they're anchored or rooted are thriving, safe, healthy, vibrant communities. What do we mean by, what are the kinds of anchor institutions? As I said, universities, hospitals, local governments, obviously. The government in New York City is not, moving to Phoenix or offshoring itself to Beijing. Museums, libraries, performing arts centers. Sports teams are often thought of as anchor institutions, although living in Cleveland, as I am now, we saw the Browns leave a few years ago, so there's an occasional swapping out. And other kinds of cultural institutions. And they really are, in terms of the life of a city, an untapped potential. And let me just give some American figures with apologies to Donald, who's visiting us from London. If you take the procurement in all of the hospitals and universities in the United States, year in, year out spending to keep the doors open, and you aggregated that, it's over $1 trillion. 6% of the gross domestic product from institutions that do not leave our communities. And their endowments get nearly up to $1 billion, but often are not, $1 trillion, but are often not invested in a way that looks at how do we make these investment decisions in a way that benefit the community. So that's the frame of what we're going to be talking about today. Our institutions, not just for the services they provide and the social mission, the teaching, the arts, the culture, but as economic factors in our communities. And so with that, I'll turn it over to Donald.
Thank you. I'll stand up in case you can't see me. Morning, and thank you very much to MAS for inviting me to the convention. Slides you'll see on the screen illustrate the progress of what we call the Tate Modern project. By the time our new extension is completed in 2016, That'll be a 20-year programme to renovate and then extend former power station into a cultural institution. And as a central driver in the reinvention of what was a fairly rundown part of central London when we started. It's a project that's involved around $500 million of public and private finance to create, as most of you will know, one of the most popular art museums in the world, with 5 million visitors visiting us per annum. And as a consequence has seen a trebling of its residential population and a tenfold increase in the workforce in the area. But the project's also been about taking a proactive approach to managing change and success, developing a social model to establish a creative catalyst, not just physically, but philosophically rooted in a balanced community and a place in the city. It's been about meshing, a good new word out there yesterday, the institution in a series of contexts and long-term partnerships, political, business, economic, community, cultural and place-making. And hopefully we'll go on to talk about this a bit more in the discussion, but in my 2 minutes, here are 4 constant principles which I think have been keys to our success so far. And I say so far because I think in this sort of work, success is as much about helping to shape the future as it is to reflecting on the past. It's a constant part of what we do in public institutions. So here's 4 key principles which I sort of swear by. Partnerships and dialogue need to be constant narratives, whether that's with local communities, with politicians, or with businesses. Engagement with and public ownership of institutions needs to be active, not passive, whether that's in planning architectural function, an education programme, multi-use of facilities, or public realm strategies. It's important, it's democratic, and it's good for business. Thirdly, when it comes to placemaking, for me, master planning is the language of the past. We need to, and we're trying to, at Tate Modern around, develop more sophisticated, more organic, and more highly evolved models of community and city development. And finally, using cultural and public institutions to create new dialogues about the role of culture, creativity, artists, and communities to build the society we aspire for in the future. And that's what public institutions like mine need to be doing. So maybe they're sort of obvious things to kick us off with, but as Greg Clark, I think, said yesterday, seems to me that these values need to be part of the DNA of institutions if they're going to maintain relevance and achieve success in their communities and cities. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much, Donald. Jennifer, would you like to go next?
Wonderful. I think, Ted, I'd add another definition, perhaps, to anchor institutions, which is, are you a subway station? Because we're very proud of Mr. College to be in the mosaic. And I remember actually one of the second call I got when I became president after my mother was from Donald Trump asking if we would actually sell our campus. And the sense of place to me was very clear because I immediately said, we're a subway station. We could never leave this part of our home. But it has been interesting in New York City as what we call a vertical campus. We are 4 buildings on 4 corners, and we have been there, as you said, for a very long time in the community, and I think are accepted as a fabric of the community and don't have that tension you often find of a town and gown sense. People in New York understand the mission of the City University, and particularly Hunter College, of providing excellent education at a price people can afford. So there's a sense of respect for our mission. But I've hoped, as somebody who's been involved in civic life in New York City for my career, to add more. And we have worked both in 3 places that I want to discuss today to think very consciously of who we are in our neighborhood. We are on 68th and Lexington, and one of the places the neighborhood has become very conscious of our presence has been, unfortunately, through crisis. And in the blackout of 2003, we became the only place that had lights on Lexington Avenue. And it was a fascinating experience to personally walk the streets, welcome people in from the subways. We took all the water, all the food, and actually my whole candy stash to really give out to the people of New York City. We had hundreds of people using our facilities, our restrooms, and just staying for a while before they could go on. And then during Sandy, we once again opened a shelter and ran a shelter, and many of the people in the neighborhood volunteered with homeless populations. But we've wanted to do more, and the first building on our slide is a building that we've reopened, and we feel as a public college, we have given something incredibly important and valuable back to the neighborhood and to the city by restoring the home of Franklin and Eleanor Roosevelt, which was a wedding present from Franklin's mom, Sarah. The only stipulation was that she kept half of it for herself. We call that the first New Deal, and it was a wonderful place where they did live, and of course becomes very important in history because as a house built in 1908 had an elevator, which was very unusual. So when Roosevelt comes down with polio, they move back into the house, have a wonderful relationship with Hunter College in the 30s, and arrange for Hunter to buy the home. It was used by Hunter, but was closed for 10 years when I arrived at Hunter in 2001. And we have been able to restore it. And I just want to thank my partner, Richard Olcott, who you'll hear from soon, for having the vision as the architect on this project to completely blow out the basement and backyard to create a great room where we now have a very vibrant set of public policy programs. And that is a way we are working to try to engage the neighborhood to say, we are a phenomenal educational institution, but please come and share our content, share our discussion. Let us really open your minds and be a place where you can engage in intellectual discourse, not just see us as that foreign school. And it's been very successful, and we are so excited to see the community come to our public programming. The second example that you see on the screen is a new building in which we joined a new neighborhood. About 3 years ago, we opened the Silverman School of Social Work on 119th Street and 3rd Avenue. And it was a real estate swap from our social work school on 79th Street, was used as a place where we could leverage the value, get the resources to build a new building in East Harlem. And that was very purposeful, to bring our social work school to a neighborhood that needed the services. We also brought our School of Public Health, our Center for Aging, and our Puerto Rican archives. And the goal was to live our mission. And we have been working very dedicatedly with the community to try to avoid the mistakes that people often find when schools go into neighborhoods and try to engage. And we are providing interns and field work and working very closely with the neighborhood. So that's our new and our historic experiences.
Good, thank you. And I'm a proud father of a Hunter graduate, and I can testify both the education is outstanding and it's very affordable. Let me turn to Richard. Do you need the clicker for slides?
Tony.
Tony, sorry.
No, I'm being very low tech today. Okay. I apologize. I work in a library.
Yeah, okay.
It's an honor to be here. Always an honor to be at anything MAS is involved in, particularly at Summit. And amazing leadership. So very quickly, the New York Public Library is the largest circulating library in America, as well as the most used research library in the world. So anchor institutions, the New York Public Library has close to 20 million physical visits a year, which is more than all of the cultural institutions and professional sporting teams in this town combined.
Good news.
When people say that the life of the mind is ending, come to the library. Every seat is filled. People are lining up for our computers. More books are circulating than ever, also electronic books, more educational programs. And that's amazing. But in order to be a responsive anchor institution, we have to continue to change. Our model has been basically a passive model for a century, since Andrew Carnegie helped to establish us. And again, we have to maintain the capacity for people to come in, take our books, use our quiet, use our air conditioning, use our computers. That's essential. Something like a quarter of New York doesn't have computers or broadband at home. We are the free place that they have that access. About a quarter of New York doesn't have books or can't afford books. They depend on the library. We have to maintain all those services, but we have to continue to move to meet the real needs of education in this town. And that means being proactive. So I'll give you a few examples. Every day after school, something between 20 and 30,000 students, kids, come into our library branches, and they're safe there, and that's fabulous. And they play an awful lot of computer games. A little less fabulous. Don't get me wrong, my kids spent a good deal of time, particularly in middle school. I used to say millions of virtual people died for my son's middle school career. But we need to do better. So we launched last week a set of 4 after-school pilots that will end up reaching 20,000 kids within 2 or 3 years. It'll be the largest after-school program in America. We have the facilities, we have the trust, we have the kids. We're hiring the staff. We're raising funds. We just got the largest gift in the history of the New York Public Library since Andrew Carnegie for educational programs in the branches. That particular gift from the Helen Gurley Brown Trust will enable us to pick 5 branches in the poorest neighborhoods of New York, 250 kids starting in 8th grade every year, and throw resources at them until we can get them into college. The same kinds of resources that middle-class families take for granted. We'll also do innovation zones, homework help zones, literacy zones. The New York Public Library is proud to be the largest free provider of English language instruction in New York after the public schools. But this is a town of immigrants, 1/3 to 1/2 of our population. And God willing, that isn't going to change. We turn tens of thousands of people away. We've tripled our English language instruction in the last year, and we aim to go 10-fold increase. We will use every facility that we can lay our hands on. We're the leading free provider of computer skills training in this town. You can't even apply for a job without access to a computer. We've doubled that in the last year, and we're going to go 6-fold increase. And we found ourselves in a situation that was quaint, where the public school system, we all grew up with public schools with 10,000 books, often out of date, and a card catalog. You cannot keep up with the 21st century thirst for knowledge with that kind of a collection. And so we partnered with the Brooklyn and Queens systems. We are now, in effect, the circulating library for the entire public school system of New York. So instead of those 10,000 out-of-date books, we're up to 600 schools. We'll be in all schools within 2 more years. Computers linked to 17 million books, and we will simply deliver physically, and I'm sure eventually virtually, whatever any student or teacher needs. Just as we can now deliver what's in our research collections. For 100 years, you had to trudge up the steps to see our amazing treasures. Now we ask teachers, what do you need to meet the needs of the Common Core? And we'll put it online for New York City students and for students around the country. In order to be the fundamental educational free provider for New Yorkers and for people potentially throughout the world, we have to keep changing. We have to continue to preserve our values and our mission and what people depend on us for, but we cannot sit tight. The world of libraries and of information is changing in the most revolutionary possible way, and New York needs to proudly be in the forefront of that.
Great, thank you very much, Anthony. And next, Richard Olcott, and then I'll have a question or two to pose in the remaining time.
So I wanted to talk this morning. You've been thinking about how can architecture be a positive change agent in communities, and the answer is, of course it can, but not in ways that you might expect. And I think it'd be easy to give you the standard architect spiel about modern architecture can change the world, and glass buildings in particular, can create openness and porosity and all those buzzwords that, about clarity and democracy and bringing the community in. But the reality is considerably more nuanced than that, obviously. And And what it's really about, I think in our experience, is the vision of the institution that we were working with, and in particular the people that are driving, that make the difference. So in that regard, I wanted to show two examples. What you're looking at is the old Yale Art Gallery, which we have recently completed a 14-year renovation. This is obviously a Florentine Gothic fortress, an ivory tower. It's literally a gated community. The university itself, I think for many years, is regarded, sitting in the city of New Haven, as an exclusive place, a very exclusive place. Here you can see now, here's the recently completed renovation. There's actually 3 buildings, including the Louis Kahn's famous 1953 gallery building on the left. And it looks the same, and that's by design, because this is they're all landmark buildings. But through some kind of hat trick, it is now an incredibly open, porous place. It is packed all the time. It has people, students, people from out of town, and most importantly, people from the city of New Haven and school groups in particular, who are thronging to this place and somehow find their way in. Now, how did that happen? It happened because the university, and not just the gallery, but the university made a real point of thinking about how to open this institution to the city and embrace their community. And I think that has perhaps even more to do with the people, as I said, that are driving. There's the director, Jock Reynolds, who's giving a tour here. And many people have told me they've gone to the gallery and there was Jock standing in the lobby saying, "Let me show you around." And then, they had a 2-hour tour of the museum. It's a sort of amazing thing. He's obviously the tip of the spear, but everyone in this institution is doing their part to bring people from all walks of life into what's an incredible experience of art. Here you can see some people doing that. Meanwhile, in Boston, a few years ago, we completed a building for WGBH. This is the mothership of public television and radio and internet now. And they moved from an invisible location behind the Harvard Business School to a highly visible one right on the Mass Pike, which you see in the foreground here, right as you enter Boston. And they reach their audience through all of those different media, in particular on the screen that you can see here that thousands of highway drivers see every morning. They put a different picture on the screen, some kind of thought-provoking picture. They reach...
Not too distracting.
Not too distracting. They reach their audience through radio and live performance. They've made a huge effort to actually bring the community literally into the building, so you can go see Yo-Yo Ma perform in a very tiny hall, or they have lectures or parties, all kinds of public events. They really try to do their part to bring the community in. And here, like on the internet, this is actually one of the websites that they put up in response to the Congress repeatedly trying to cut their funding. And it's about the people that are working there. But the irony of this is that I think a lot of people, the people who work here love it, the people in the community love it, but there's a kind of undercurrent of people thinking, did I spend my $100 on fancy architecture? There's somewhere it's written that not-for-profits are supposed to have lousy buildings with no windows to work in. And it's just not cool if they have a really great piece of architecture. So that's an interesting contrast with the other. So with
Great,
that,
thank you very much.
Right.
Appreciate it.
Yeah.
So those were outstanding presentations. I wanted to pose a definition and get your thoughts on this, that an institution like your own is expressing its full anchor mission, if you will, when it consciously applies its place-based economic power in combination with its human and intellectual resources to better the long-term welfare of the community in which your institution resides. I want to get your thoughts about that definition, and also if you generally buy that concept, when you think about the difference you're making in the broader community and all these different dimensions, are there certain indicators or metrics that you think are important to track to see if the community really is benefiting in the way that you intend? And perhaps Jennifer, if you'd like to go.
I think it's a very complex and important question. And moving to East Harlem, we actually didn't anticipate the great economic impact we would have. We were thinking more of our social mission. But it turns out that by having this beautiful new building, and it is beautiful, and I go to Richard's point, which I think is very important, we set out to design a building that said, please come inside. It has the glass bottom, it's very welcoming, and it was an architectural statement of our mission. It has also really made the neighborhood flourish. There are co-ops that are opening, low-income and mid-income co-ops in East Harlem. There are restaurants and other service industries that are opening, and the Times has written twice about the economic impact of the Hunter School of Social Work moving to East Harlem. And I think that's a very positive thing. It's interesting for us because East Harlem is the #1 location of public housing in New York City. We probably won't get a lot of pushback in the issue of gentrification because that would have been the other side of it. So in a way, we're able to, I think, help a neighborhood grow in a very positive way. And then the social impact is very important. It's harder to measure. And we've actually set ourselves a goal that in a period of 10 to 20 years, we are tracking the health indicators in East Harlem because they are the worst in the country in terms of diabetes, asthma, and other chronic diseases. The income levels, because there are terrible issues of underperformance of the children, and also in terms of economic security, of income security. So we are watching that data, and we have set a standard for ourselves to move the needle in all 3 areas. And we're working backwards from that goal through the field work, through the neighborhood engagement, through applied research, through training professionals to hold ourselves to making a difference. It will not be acceptable to us if we don't help improve life in those neighborhoods.
And that critical question of how do you benefit the community without it setting in motion this gentrification process which ultimately blows apart the traditional historic community is one that all of our institutions look at. Donald, on your side of the pond, how do you think of these questions?
I think we've done a lot of work about econometrics and the economic impact, and you can produce quite impressive figures. But I think we do ourselves an injustice. On one hand, I would say to say a museum or a public institution can cure the ills of society is too much of a claim. But if the partnership base is right, we can have that much wider impact that you're talking about. Measuring it is more different. It's much more qualitative. It's much more about the glue that happens, and it's much more longitudinal. And that's difficult in a very commercial economic situation, and also with property prices in central London. So half of the time it's the advocacy with the partners, and political advocacy is central to allowing the space to develop the qualitative impact of the museum as well as the demonstration of the hard economics.
Yep. So not just the quantitative, but the qualitative
Absolutely.
Measures are essential. And Tony, how do you think of this with institutions all over the city?
Well, I think, the library has generally been in most of its places for a very long time and is an anchor, and then the neighborhoods change around them. So I grew up in the Inwood section of Manhattan. When I was growing up, it was Jewish and Catholic, and we all used the library with a little bit of tension there and the best of New York traditions. The neighborhood shifted to mostly Dominican, and my mother. It's now been it's now gentrifying, so also with some splits. And you go back into the same facility, and it's fascinating. The population has changed. The books on the shelf change because as the languages change, the librarians move the collections around. And yet people are still doing, exactly what you want them to do. And we can measure that in terms of butts and seats or books circulating. We can measure our impact in education in terms of impact on student achievement. We even measure our impact on global reading because we are industry leaders in providing electronic access to library lending, not just for New York, but nationally and potentially globally. But I will confess to you, I like non-quantitative metrics as well. I'll feel like, I won't be able to put my finger on it exactly, but I'll feel better when I take the subway in the morning and instead of half the people playing Angry Birds on their cell phones, they're actually, reading on their cell phones. I don't like reading on my cell phone, but I'd prefer that to Angry Birds with nothing against Angry Birds, please.
Great. And to change the question a bit, in your profession of architecture, are you seeing trends, the kind of work you're doing, is this a trend within the profession generally to express your work with greater engagement and definition with the community?
Oh, I think for our practice, certainly, it's what drives us. It's what really interests us because we do think we all want to make change. We are a bunch of optimists and idealists, and it's maybe not a great business model, but there it is. I was thinking about, because we were talking earlier about, to me, the accessibility is the kind of really key thought. And the Tate Modern is free, right? For the most, unless it's a special exhibition, correct? The library is obviously free, right? Going to Roosevelt House is free. Going to Yale is free. And I think, yes, it's a great collection, it's famous, but that makes a huge difference. People feel like, hey, I can just walk right in here. There's none of the gates that happen physically, architecturally, because it literally is open. Now, I don't know how that works, as a business model either, right? But
that'll have to
it's
be
a
our last
commitment.
word.
It's a commitment on the university's part, for example, at Yale, to say that is the most important thing. We're going to make it that way, and then the city of New Haven feels like they can come on in. So.
Terrific. So with that, we have to give access to this stage to the next group of people. I want to thank our panelists. It was really outstanding discussion. Thank you.